The Willow Bay Waypoint. Chapter 7. Your stories always end so badly. They're sad. And you, Master Chester, are too quick to judge contents without context. That impatience will cost you the point and the prize if you aren't careful. Oh, all right. The little pig had been attacked by the others, and she was hiding from them under her house of hay while digging for her life. That's where we were. Very good. Nice to know you're listening to my stories, even if you don't like them. I didn't say I didn't like them. I said they were sad. The woman of the woods watched in silence as he refilled his glass with the fresh batch of hot tea she'd set before him. Now then, the little pig spent the next few days digging a discreet escape route. In her rush to escape before losing the courage, her appetite had run further from her mind than ever before. On the final day, her wounds from their attack still fresh, she wriggled and scraped her way painfully from beneath the wooden fence and disappeared into the crowded marketplace, unnoticed. Being a smart little swine, she'd shown herself briefly at the fence line, stuffing her snout through while the master of the pen was watching. "They roughed you up pretty good, poor little piggy." The old farmer shook his head. "Hopefully something good comes from it. Might just have to keep you separate till we know for sure." Grandy stopped. "Do you have a question, Master Chester?" "What does he mean he hopes something good comes from it? They beat her up." He wrinkled his nose. "Well, how did you come across your job with Master Buck?" "I told you the story already. He saved me from the Oh." He stopped mid-sentence as the realization struck him between the eyes. It made a certain kind of sense. Tough out the rough stuff and... He took a sip of his tea, nodding slowly. She did the same before continuing on with her story. In his mind, the market master had planned to retire the pig to his personal farm just outside of town. But how could she have known? So she left as planned. Risking everything, she dodged feet and hooves, wheels and tables and stands of merchandise. She oinked and squealed all the way to the front gate, and then through it, to the meadow, and beyond the glistening ponds she'd only ever heard stories about. The brave little swine wrestled through the underbrush, all the while imagining the master might be hot on her heels. She tore through the first layer of trees, and then the next and the next, until completely exhausted, she fell to the forest floor. The cool grass gathered around her, swallowing her up into their secret places. The wind had whispered her journey through them, and out of their compassion, they hid her away. And there the little pig slept for 3 whole days. She woke to an especially bright morning, and the moment her eyes began to blink awake, the woods erupted into life. The birds sang out joyously, announcing their new friend had awakened. A doe and its young ones poked through the underbrush to offer their welcome. A bunch of raccoons peeped from a hole halfway up the oak she'd been resting beneath. A bundle of squirrels quarreled for the best seats on the boughs above. It wasn't often that they met market folk, and so their curiosity consumed the fear in them, pushing them in for a closer view. Besides, what really was there to fear of something so silly and harmless looking? The tiny pig told them everything. She filled in the gaps left by the wind, and they soaked her in until the last drop led them to where she was sitting before them. They all sat silently, each pondering the things she'd said in their own way.
"So as you can see,"
she squealed gratefully as she accepted the nuts, berries, and fresh blooms the forest critters offered her.
"I had no choice but to leave,"
she finished. They were different than the animals she was used to. Physically, they might have resembled one another. Yes, the deer somewhat resembled the cows and horses, and the tiny birds may be a near kin to the flightless chickens who'd pecked about outside of her pen. And yet each shared something altogether more important. Without pause, they'd accepted the little pig. Instead of crowding her out of the way or pushing her from the trough, they'd offered her their own food. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't left with slobbery scraps. The nuts and berries were fresh and delicious. They were better than anything she'd ever tasted. Well, almost. The lady of the woods stopped to laugh and offer Chester a refill of the sweet hot tea he'd all but emptied from his mug again.
"Thank you."
He pulled the cup back to himself. Well, what do you think so far?
"I'm not sure yet."
Wise answer. She smiled impishly. Well then, shall we? Chester nodded fervently. Now, for the next few days, life was sheer bliss for the little sow. She spent all her spare time getting to know her new friends. She taught the birds to weave together the river reeds for sturdier nests, like she'd seen the merchant's fellows do so often before. She helped the tree critters and the deer root out the best mushrooms and edible roots. She'd developed a skill over the years of spotting treasures and collecting the most delectable scraps. The little piggy was happy to extend her gift to help those who'd been so kind to her. As the weeks went by, her belly widened until it looked as though it might pop. What is the gestation period of domesticated pigs?
According to animals.mom.com, an easy way to remember the length of gestation in swine is the rule of threes: 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days, for a total of 114 days. This is an average length. Pigs born a couple of days early or late should be healthy.
As the weeks passed, her belly widened until it looked as though it might pop. Over time, she felt less and less inclined to leave the grass and fallen log nest the beavers had helped her to cultivate. The less she moved, the more her appetite grew and grew. The poor little piggy started to crave truffles at first. And then she began craving the mystery meat and delicious pop sizzling oil to drizzle over her daily nuts and berries. The phantom of the savory taste made her mouth water constantly. The little sow started to feel irritable, until the songs she once loved, echoing above her from her little bird friends, sounded like pointless noise. Pointless noise keeping her from napping away the ever longer days between meals. Whenever a furry fellow forester would poke their head in for anything outside of a meal offering, she'd simply snort at them and turn her back. This went on for a time until she nearly tripled in size sideways. The other critters started chattering amongst each other, some out of concern, others out of hurt or frustration over her treatment of them. But none of them was quite certain of what to do about the testy pig's situation. As the discomfort rose in her belly, the little pig became quite certain the only cure for her plight was a heaping helping of the mystery slop. But how? Short of sneaking back to the marketplace by the shade of night, she couldn't think of anything. And yet, she could think of nothing else. The savory aroma filled her dreams and left her more ornery upon waking to the angry grumbling in her belly. This all went on for long enough for one brave little bird. After all the talk and chatter from the others, he decided to go speak to the little sow for himself. He hopped boldly through the opening of the swine's cozy house.
Little pig!
He called out.
Oh, little pig, are you home?
Now, the little pig was home, but she remained perfectly silent beneath the grass bed she'd nestled into for a sleep. She squinted one beady eye open and then the other to see who'd invaded her nap time so carelessly.
Little pig!
It peeped again. For some reason beyond her ability to comprehend, the little sow was suddenly picturing the little finch as a bundle of slop drizzled in the mysterious street. Her mouth began watering, her snout sniffling, and in her defense, she was still waking up, and especially surly. And if that wasn't enough, her beady piggy eyes had begun to grow dim.
Little pig!
Before the poor little finch could finish its sentence, the hungry sow had swallowed it whole, only aware of her blunder after burping out its pretty shining feathers. She watched them flitter slowly to the ground, glittering in the morning sun pouring in from the opening of her little sanctuary. The little pig lamented and squealed unconsolably for the rest of the day. The pain in her belly grew worse and worse until all of the forest seemed to be gathered outside of her home, waiting anxiously for the awful noise to go quiet. Each growing more desperate for peace. Just before the sun disappeared over the far horizon, the forest fell silent. The weary critters pressed in, overcome again in their curiosity of the market critter who'd found them. Through the placid stillness, tiny grunts sounded. Suddenly, the past week made sense to each of them.
Hoo hoo hoo,
laughed the wise old owl from the bough above.
Our little piggy is a mother.
With that, all past twittering and cheeping was forgotten, along with the sow's bad behavior. It was no wonder her belly had grown and she'd been so hungry and hard to please. She'd had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 little piglets growing inside. That night, the forest creatures celebrated, spreading the good news far and wide over the winds.
Let me guess.
Chester was already rising from his seat as he spoke.
That's it for the day, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Granby chuckled.
So is that what the farmer meant, or the market guy, when he said something good might come from it?
Granby smiled. I guess that's for you to decide. She followed him toward the entry. I'd like for you to deliver this note to Master Buck for me, if you would. Chester reached for it and tucked it away in the front pocket of his satchel. Now, you be sure to check in on Nessy for me and tell her about the toad you caught. You can let her know I said it was bigger than Blat the giant. Her eyes twinkled. She'll know what I mean, and I'm sure she'll tell you all about it. Chester nodded curiously and wrestled back to his feet.
Okay, I will. And hopefully she can come back with me tomorrow.
He called over his shoulder with a final wave. I hope so too. She cooed after him. I hope so too. To be continued. Hey, thanks for tuning in for this chapter. I'll have the next one out as soon as it's written, and if you would like to help support the channel, please feel free to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. It makes this so much more fun. Until next time, have a beautiful week.